Found in the snow along a guardrail on a Lyle road. 44 years ago today, Pam Maurer's body was discovered. The Downers Grove South High School student had been raped and strangled.
A purse. That was the first thing the road crew found. Half open. Sitting in the snow on the shoulder of College Road in Woodridge, Illinois. Resting against a guardrail like someone had set it down for a moment before walking away. One of the workers stepped closer. And just beyond the barrier, the shape in the snow resolved into something that no one there that morning would ever forget. A girl, positioned, arranged, placed to communicate a single message to anyone who found her. Car accident, hit and run, tragic, impersonal, move on. The killer had constructed that illusion carefully. He expected the world to read his staging and stop asking questions. The DuPage County coroner did not stop. The bruising on her neck told a different story the moment a medical examiner leaned close. A length of rubber hose recovered nearby confirmed the rest. This was not a traffic accident. This was Pamela Maurer, 16 years old, a junior at Downers Grove South High School. A girl from Woodridge, Illinois, who had left a friend's house the night before January 13, 1976, to walk to a nearby McDonald's and buy a soda. She never came home. And the man who took her life had enough composure, afterward, to drive away without a single witness catching his face. His name would not appear in a single police document connected to this case for 44 years. He was not in a prison somewhere. He was not hiding. He was living in these same suburbs, working, moving through the same streets as Pamela's family. And science, the science that would eventually destroy him, hadn't been invented yet. If cases like this are why you're here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every case we cover is fully sourced from verified records, investigative reports, and forensic documentation. No speculation, no invention. What comes next changes everything. To understand what happened to Pamela Maurer, you have to understand what Woodridge, Illinois was in January of 1976. Our investigation into the case files and historical records reveals a community that existed inside a very particular kind of confidence. The confidence of the post-war American suburb. Modest homes. School district boundaries drawn with care. The quiet, predictable rhythm of families who believed the worst things happened somewhere else. Pamela was 16 years old. She was a junior at Downers Grove South High School, a large public school serving families from across the western suburbs. The kind of school where you knew roughly everyone in your grade and strangers were visible. What the records show about her life, and what her family has shared publicly, describes a teenager who was entirely, unremarkably ordinary. In the best possible sense of that word. She lived with her family in Woodridge. She went to school. She had friends nearby. The kind of close suburban proximity where you could walk to each other's houses on a winter evening without anyone thinking twice about it. The evening of January 12, 1976, is documented through the accounts of the people who were with her. Pamela had spent that evening at a friend's house, a completely routine event, the kind of ordinary Tuesday night social life that leaves nothing to explain or examine. At some point during the evening, she decided to go out and get a soft drink. The McDonald's on Ogden Avenue was close. The walk was short. The errand was the kind of thing teenagers do without ceremony. She said she was going. She left. What is striking? When you sit with the case files and read the timeline assembled by investigators, is how completely unremarkable the departure was. There was no argument, no tension, no reason for anyone present to remember it as a significant moment until it became one retroactively. Pamela Maurer walked out of that house on Ogden Avenue on the night of January 12, 1976. And she did not come back. She did not make it to the McDonald's. She did not make it home. What happened in the space between that door and the place she was going is the question that would take investigators 44 years to fully answer. What we know is this. Somewhere on that short route through those quiet suburban streets, Pamela Maurer encountered Bruce Everett Lindahl. She did not know him. He knew exactly what he intended to do. The autopsy was completed on January 13, 1976. The cause of death was manual strangulation. Sexual assault had occurred. A length of rubber hose had been used. These facts were documented with the tools available at the time, which is to say, they were documented with almost no forensic power to find who was responsible for them. What my research discovered about 1976 forensic science is this. The entire field was operating on identification by comparison. Blood typing, hair analysis under a microscope, fingerprint matching against a known suspect. Every method required a name first. You had to know who you were looking for before the science could confirm it. If you had no name, the science had no answer. The investigators working Pamela's case had no name. What they had was biological evidence, specifically semen recovered from her clothing. And here is the thing that matters. The thing that the case files make absolutely clear. They kept it. They packaged it. They preserved it without a formal protocol requiring them to do so, and without any certainty that it would ever be useful. In 1976, the concept of DNA profiling did not exist. The word genomics was not yet in common use. The database that would one day hold millions of offender profiles had not been conceived. The laboratory that would eventually unlock this case had not been founded. None of that was knowable to the men and women who sealed that evidence bag. They preserved it anyway. That decision, unremarkable at the time, made by instinct or protocol or some combination of both, is the reason this case has an ending. One evidence bag. Sealed in the winter of 1976. Placed into storage. Waiting. The investigation that followed Pamela Maurer's murder was not passive. Records show that detectives pursued every available lead across months of active work. They canvassed the area around College Road. They interviewed Pamela's friends, her school contacts, the people who had last seen her that evening. They worked the case the way any serious department works a case, with the tools they had, in the time they had, against a problem they could not yet see clearly. The problem was fundamental. Bruce Lindahl had no prior connection to Pamela Maurer. He was not her neighbor, not a family acquaintance, not someone who moved in circles that touched hers in any documentable way. He selected her as a stranger. He abducted her. He moved her body from the location of the crime to a different jurisdiction before staging the scene. Every investigative method available in 1976 required a thread, a name, a relationship, a witness who could place someone at the scene. There was no thread. What's truly striking about the timeline of this period is what was happening in other jurisdictions simultaneously. In Aurora, in Downers Grove, in communities across those same western suburbs, a man named Bruce Lindahl was being accused of rape. A woman named Annette Lazar reported he had assaulted her at gunpoint in 1979. Her case was dismissed. Investigators later documented that Lindahl was, at that time, living in the home of a local police officer, a man named Dave Torres. That proximity shaped how early allegations were received. No one in any of those jurisdictions connected the name Bruce Lindahl to the file on College Road. 25 years passed. The evidence waited. In 2001, investigators extracted a DNA profile from the preserved biological evidence and submitted it to CODIS, the National Combined DNA Index System. The database searched. It returned nothing. No match. No name. No record of anyone in the offender database whose profile aligned with what had been recovered from Pamela's clothing. The profile entered the system and waited. There is a particular kind of grief that does not announce itself. It does not arrive at a funeral and then leave. It moves into the structure of ordinary life and stays there in the chair at a dinner table, in the date on a birthday that never changes, in the moment, every few years, when someone asks a question and the answer is still the same. We don't have no resolution yet. Pamela's father and brother eventually relocated to Texas. Life continued, the way life continues, with or without answers. Milestones accumulated, the kind that families mark with photographs and celebrations, and each one carried the specific weight of her absence. She was 16 when she died. Every year that passed was a year she was not there for. What the records make clear is that the case was never formally closed. Investigators at the Lisle Police Department continued to carry it. The evidence sat in storage. The CODIS profile waited for a match that did not come. 44 years is not an abstraction. It is not a number on a case file. It is a father who spent 4 decades without knowing the name of the man who killed his daughter. Then, in 2019, the Lisle Police Department made a decision. They were going to reopen this case, using a technology that had not existed for the previous 43 years of the investigation. The search was about to change its method entirely. Before we go further, if a case like this is the reason you come here, make it permanent. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. What comes next is the part that changes everything. The technology brought into this case in 2019 is called investigative genetic genealogy. Most people have heard of consumer DNA testing, the kind where you spit into a tube, mail it to a company, and find out you have distant relatives in places you didn't expect. What most people don't realize is that this same infrastructure, these same vast public databases of voluntary DNA submissions, became one of the most powerful criminal investigative tools in modern forensic history. Here is how it works. In plain terms, traditional DNA matching CODIS works like a locked door. You need the exact key. The suspect's DNA must already be in the offender database for a match to return. If they're not in it, the door stays shut. Investigative genetic genealogy works like finding an open window in the same building. Scientists upload an unknown DNA profile to public ancestry databases platforms where millions of ordinary people have voluntarily submitted their genetic information to find relatives. The database does not need an exact match. It finds partial matches, the kind of shared DNA you have with a third cousin, a fourth cousin, someone you've never met and whose name you don't know. From those partial matches, professional genealogists build a family tree. They work backward through generations to find common ancestors, then forward again to identify which living or recently deceased member of that family could be a genetic match to the unknown profile. In Pamela Maurer's case, Parabon Nanolabs was brought in to lead this work. Branch by branch, generation by generation, the tree narrowed, and it pointed with accumulating certainty to one man. A man named Bruce Everett Lindahl, a man who had been dead since April 4, 1981. Bruce Everett Lindahl was born on January 29, 1953. He was 22 years old when he encountered Pamela Maurer on the night of January 12, 1976. He was 23 when her body was found. What my research revealed about his life, in the years that followed that night, is this. He returned to it without apparent disruption. He was an electrician by trade, trained with a degree in electromechanics, a skilled professional who worked in the same western Chicago suburbs where he committed his crimes. People who knew him described him, consistently, as athletic, personable, a nice guy. He played racquetball, he went parachuting, he was the kind of man nobody looked at twice. That was not accident, it was architecture. Records show that between 1976 and 1981, he continued to move through these communities, continued to select victims, continued to operate while an investigation that could not see him stalled on a shelf in a Lisle police station. He died on April 4, 1981, in a Naperville apartment, not by arrest, not by consequence, but by accident. While stabbing an 18-year-old named Charles Huber 28 times, he severed his own femoral artery with his own knife. He bled to death on top of his victim. He was 28 years old. He went to his grave without ever being questioned about Pamela Maurer. When investigators confirmed his identity as her killer in 2020, they obtained a court order to exhume his remains. A DNA sample was extracted. The comparison was run against the evidence preserved in January of 1976. The match probability came back at 1 in 1.8 quadrillion. To be precise about what that number means, if you lined up 1.8 quadrillion unrelated people and tested every one of them, only Bruce Lindahl would match. There was no other explanation. There was no reasonable doubt. He was the man who staged that scene on College Road. When the confirmation came through, Detective Chris Loudon did not pick up a phone. He boarded a plane. He flew to Texas. He sat across from Pamela's father and her brother, and he told them the news in person the way news like this deserves to be delivered. The response Pamela's father gave, as documented in reporting on the case, was not what you might expect after 44 years of silence. He did not ask about the killer's history. He did not express anger that the answer had taken this long. He thanked the detective for not forgetting his daughter. That is the sentence that stays with you when you sit with this case. Not the forensic statistics, not the investigative timeline. That sentence from a father who had been waiting for 44 years, whose first response to finally receiving an answer was gratitude that someone had kept looking. There was no trial. Bruce Lindahl had been dead for 39 years before his name appeared in Pamela's file. The justice available was the kind that lives in documentation and the confirmation of truth, in the public record of who he was, in the knowledge that his name now belongs to what he did and not to the mask he wore. Pamela Maurer was 16 years old. She was a junior at Downers Grove South High School. She left a friend's house on a January night in 1976 to buy a soda. She deserved to come home. Her name is Pamela Maurer. And now the record shows exactly who took her, and that the science her killer's generation couldn't imagine eventually came for his ghost. This case existed because one team of investigators in 1976 sealed an evidence bag they didn't fully understand yet, and another team 44 years later refused to let the file close. Pamela Maurer's name reached this screen because people kept working. If you believe these families deserve to be remembered, if you think the names of victims matter more than the names of killers, then do one thing before you leave this video. Leave a comment. Write her name, Pamela Maurer. That comment tells the algorithm this story matters. It pushes this case in front of someone who may not have known her name until today. One comment, one share, one notification turned on. That's all it takes to make sure she is not forgotten again. Her name was Pamela Maurer. Say it. The Pamela Maurer case was not the last time Bruce Lindahl's victims received answers. In March of 1979, a 19-year-old named Kathy Halley disappeared from her apartment complex in North Aurora, Illinois. Her body was recovered from the Fox River approximately 1 month later. Her clothing had been submerged in water. The biological evidence already compromised by weeks of river exposure was not sufficient for conventional DNA analysis. The case went cold. In October of 2024, 45 years after Kathy Halley disappeared, investigators applied a technology called MVAC. What my research found about this technology is this. MVAC is, in essence, a forensic vacuum. It uses a combination of fluid and suction to extract microscopic biological material from fabric surfaces that standard swabbing cannot reach, surfaces that have been washed, submerged, or degraded beyond what conventional methods can recover. It was designed precisely for evidence that the forensic science of its era could not process. The DNA extracted from Kathy Halley's clothing was run against the profile of Bruce Everett Lindahl. It was a definitive match. 45 years after she disappeared from North Aurora, Kathy Halley has a confirmed answer. The science kept moving. It always does.